Hey everyone, we're back with another quick take episode with me and Nisha from the Edge podcast for CHROs. We've got a very interesting guest tonight, and before I sort of get in, I just want to thank everyone again for being a constant part of this journey and encouraging our quick take series as well, which has been picking up a lot of steam. So this episode right now, we're going to be talking about return to work in the literal sense, given the fact that there's been I think a month before this right now people are like, hey, we might never go back to office and things might actually transition to being remote. But right now the tables have turned again. The tides are now again indicating the fact that hey, we might come back to the office, and that's when we've got Praval here with us. So let me quickly introduce Praval. Praval Singh is from Zoho. He's the VP marketing and he's the vice president of marketing and customer experience head. And so Praval has actually been working for the last 9 years, I think, or remotely, I think since 2012. So, which is why we decided that, hey, why don't we take Praval's opinion on this? Because I think in one of our recent episodes, me and Nisha also discussed with Andrew that remote work during the pandemic and before the pandemic were actually two different concepts. And this is not the actual legitimate remote work that we're sort of becoming accustomed to. So Praval, I've got, before I sort of jump on to my very first question, I want to understand from the horse's mouth, what was remote working like before it became the hip trend of every industry, basically? What was it like?
Thanks, Varun. Thanks for having me on the show. Thank you, Nisha. Uh, Varun, it sort of takes me back to the time when I joined Zoho in 2012, and it was part of the arrangement that I live in Delhi and I would continue to be here. I remember that time, at least in India, to tell someone in your friends and family network that you have a full-time job, but you don't have to show up um, at an office, was almost surreal, right? People would not, they would believe you, but they were like, okay, we'll see how this plays out, right? It's been 9 years into that. And of course, there's no pandemic, so there's no question of that. But again, working remotely or even work from home was not essentially just working from home, right? There would be a lot of travel involved and business travel and otherwise. You spend a lot of time at airports, at other offices, meeting your colleagues in different cities and countries and so on and so forth. Then when the pandemic struck, initially we as a company of all 9,000 plus people went remote in just 3 days. A company of our size that has not been built remotely, it seemed to be like an uphill challenge, task. But I think we did rather well in settling in after the initial few weeks of people getting used to working remotely. And then I would get a lot of calls and messages asking people, okay, how have you been doing it for all this while? And then I had to tell people that, hey, while I've been working remotely, I've not been working from home and definitely not in a pandemic. So these are different things, like you said, right? But one thing, if you look at what has now happened is work used to be something that you go to, right? Uh, which it should have been what you do, and that's the sort of translation of work that has happened in the last 12 to 18 months, I would say, right? Especially in the sector that we are in, right? We're having this conversation over a video call. And I would say we're highly privileged to be able to sit at home on a high-speed internet and be able to have this conversation or a cup of coffee, right? Unfortunately, every industry, not just in India, but even globally, uh, every individual in every industry is not privileged to be able to do what they're supposed to do it this way, right? Of course, there are tools, there are platforms, there's technology that is sort of trying to solve for various needs, but there's still things, still areas, there's still functions for which you have to show up at work, right? And those are some of the industries I would say that have sort of seen the maximum hit. But yeah, all these 9 years of working remotely, working from home, working from airports and hotels, and now to this pandemic, it's been quite a journey.
I can imagine, yeah. So, what are the trends that you're picking up right now? I mean, we've all been hearing a lot of news from top of the top, line companies that they're one. We're seeing one trend that hey, everyone's aggressively buying office spaces at this point in time as well, not really letting go of most of their office spaces too. And two, people are actually saying that hey, we want you back to the office at some point or other. Whether you've got your first dose of vaccine, whether you've got both the doses of vaccine, either way, you're sort of required to be back. What are your thoughts on the trends that you've been witnessing, sort of?
Yeah, I've been hearing similar sort of experiences and stories from my the friends and extended network of people I interact with on usually on social media. So there are two things to it. One is you have to understand that a lot of people who are not used to being holed up in an apartment in a large city, which we have limited open spaces and all that, a lot of people dealing with a lot of mental health issues, right? And they may be severe, they may be not, but everybody is sort of really, really at the peak of their, unhappiness level, if you may call it that way, just by the virtue of being holed up. People want to step out, right? That's one. Now, stepping out doesn't just mean taking a holiday or going out for a meal. Of course, that's there and that's happening in whichever way they can. People can now as things are opening up. But being able to meet your colleagues and discuss a few things beyond these video sessions is something that I think has even scientifically been proved that, when you have these real FaceTime with people sitting in a room discussing about an idea or having lunch together or something of that kind, even if it's a few days a week, it adds a lot of value in individuals' personality and behavior and all of that, even productivity, I would say, right? So that's the other part of it. Now, the last part of it is, I would say, in all these months of being holed up and working from home and the industry as a whole going through the challenges of ups and downs and all that, people have sort of figured out, most people have figured out that it's not about how many hours you put in, it's about the work that you'll be able to do, right? And even if you look at managers and leadership teams at different companies, in the last 12, 18 months, they've figured out who are the people who've been able to continue to work. Okay, it's not about who checks in at 9 o'clock in the morning and who checks out at 6, but it's about how are people being able to add value? How have they been able to do that working from home in all these months? So that has, I think, changed a lot. I would say, if you look at some companies that when things went remote, they were trying to sort of put up a model where you'll have, for example, they would expect team members to have their webcams on all day, right? I mean, you cannot have surveillance system. You have to have trust as default if you're trying to set that culture of keeping up with productivity rates of the company, right? And initially, companies were trying to figure out and replicate an office environment at home. Like everybody will be on camera all day. There'll be a screen that'll be open with showing like 50 people. I mean, we know how that went, right? We've seen how that went. And then this whole video calling fatigue. Okay, every meeting doesn't have to be a video meeting, is what I believe personally, from my experience. Sure, there are cues that you get when you talk to someone on a video, and that's definitely important. But probably on some calls with some people that you engage with several times a day, you don't necessarily need that, bug versus feature story that comes in with video, I would say, in some cases. So these are things that we've seen happen in the last 12 to 18 months. But what I'm seeing going forward is, this has brought in an opportunity for companies to hire people from areas where they otherwise would have not thought of hiring, and that includes non-urban, even borderline rural areas now, I would say, right? Because we've always seen, a country of our size, for example, right? There's a lot of talent, and people would rush to larger cities to study and then graduate and get a job, right? That, and we're seeing a lot of it is changing. Of course, there's a lot of runway there to go, but I'll give you a good example of what happened within our company at Zoho. So a few months into the lockdown, the first lockdown last year, we did an internal survey. And so when we asked people to go back to their towns and villages where they come from, a few months into the lockdown, we did a survey that how many people would want to come back to Chennai, which is where our global headquarters is. You'll be surprised, 40% people said that given a choice, they would rather be where they are, close to their friends and family. And that sort of triggered an interesting concept of why don't we create more these spoke offices, satellite offices, which can have 20, 30 people. And then nobody's forced to come there every day, but they would love to see their colleagues maybe a couple of days a week, right? And of course, we had to sort of put a pause on that during the second wave, which none of us predicted would be so bad. But as things get better, we're going to open those offices again. And we have over 20, 30 offices, these satellite offices opening up, in the country, primarily in southern India, but also we have one now in Patna, by the way, right? So that is something we saw. People want to be close to their loved ones and at the same time be able to do their best work. So that's the sort of hybrid model that we are going to adopt, and we see a lot of companies doing that now. I mean, sure, there'll be companies that want everybody back to their corporate offices, but chances are that a lot more companies would be more open to the idea of people working from home or wherever they want to, at least a few days a week.
I think it essentially drives home the fact that social capital, especially in person, is irreplaceable and that we need to be there. I think, especially in the case of junior executives, because I think it's important specifically for them because they get to shadow their seniors and peers from different departments and sort of bring a more creative operational, style of working. And I think that's what builds a moat for a team going forward, and that's how snowballs into much bigger momentum. So, fair point, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Though there's a contrarian view also, Praval. I think somewhere we also have to pay some attention to what enterprises are currently doing, where to some extent, just because a lot of enterprises are paying for the vaccine, or they're getting their employees vaccinated, they want them to come back, right? And these are enterprises that can very well also function, and they have been functioning with people working from home. So if you can tell us a little bit about what you are seeing here, and what kind of a balance can be struck where people, we do understand, Pavel, we were speaking about the fact that we are still privileged, that we can work from home, and we get that, right? We completely get that. But what about the likes of Apple, etc., which completely retrieved their work from home policy itself, right? And they're saying that we want people to come back 3 days a week at least. Whereas they did have a choice, and they did tell people that we will go fully remote. So why do you think that organizations that in peak pandemic spoke a different language, but currently they're kind of speaking a different language? And I wouldn't, I mean, and I do get social capital, and but I also believe that that may not really be the only reason. Just putting that out there too.
No, that's a great question, Nisha, and you're right. Last year, when there was this sort of initial hype around declaring that we would go remote completely, a lot of companies did that. It almost became like a PR gig, like a stint, right, where every single company wanted to sort of jump on that bandwagon. I would say a lot of it, and these were companies that had not historically been remote working companies, right? They're companies that have always been remote. Right? There are a lot of companies that, Automatic is one of them. The founders, the makers of WordPress, for example, have known them as a remote company since forever, right? And they're a large team. But you have to remember that they're all remote. They're built on that fabric. That's how they recruit people. When they recruit people, they probably evaluate them for their ability to be able to work independently and all of that. But when a company is built with people without keeping that into consideration, things are very different. So making a statement that we will go all remote and we're going to sell all our offices and shut down physical offices, all of that, I don't think that's very smart thing to do. Okay, and probably why some of these companies are rolling back on that is because they've learned from their experiences in the last 1 year, right? And like I said, some of these companies are the ones that, like I said, want the webcams to be on all day by their employees to sort of have a surveillance on them, right? So what I would like to believe is remote work, work from office, remote working tools, software, technology, that cannot change the culture. Okay, the culture of the company is a fabric that is beyond just technology and tools, right? And I would like to believe that when your culture doesn't permit trust as default, okay, and in all this time you've seen new people join the company and all of that has happened. I mean, I have a lot of respect for folks in HR because they've had really hard challenge up their sleeves where they had to onboard new people without meeting them in person, without and then do all this remotely. So I think they've had a very difficult job of bringing people on board. So when you do all that and your existing teams are working remotely, they've not worked remotely before, you've brought in new team members, some of them have never met each other, all these things actually play a strong role in in the mind of leadership and the founders of whether this is working for us or not. And I'm sure there have been reasons that they've concluded that we have to go back to that model because it just did not work for them. Could be productivity issues, could be loyalty issues, could be that feeling of lack of belongingness as part of the company and all that, right? I mean, these are the reasons why people end up feeling that. And again, a lot of employees themselves have said that we want to come back to an office. We want to have that routine in our lives, right? And we don't want to sit at home and work. So that's one thing. Other thing is, if we have to remember that in India as a country, apart from these larger cities, right, there are still places where you may have infrastructure issues, right? Of course, broadband is and 4G is widely available, but then electricity itself becomes a problem in a lot of tier 2, tier 3 villages in the country or towns, small towns in the country. And then when your manager expects you to be available all the time, and then you have electricity issues, and that sort of snowballs into discussions and debates, then you end up feeling that, hey, you know what, I was better off at an office, right? So these things we've seen, experienced in the last 12, 15 months, founders, employees, everybody, right? And in the companies that saw a net negative from a productivity standpoint, definitely want the people to be back, right? And I would say that's absolutely fine. I mean, if that doesn't work, you have to find a different company to work for. It's as simple as that, right? I mean, fine, you can crib about it. You can say this is bad, this is better, or that is good. But I think at the end of the day, what works for a company just probably works for that company. That's how I would put it, right? I mean, it's easy for me to say that, oh, it should be made voluntary for people to come to office or not. But then who am I to say that for someone who's running a company and has seen that that just didn't work for someone in the last 12 months, right? I'm sure they have reasons for it. Now, how they do that and what it takes, how do they sort of incentivize their employees or convince their employees and make them feel safe and all of that is a very different problem to solve by the HR teams and all of that. So that's what my take on this issue.
Got that. And since you mentioned HR teams, you also mentioned that, in this period, there were people who were onboarded, who were new and things like that. And since we do this for HR folks, do you think that you have a few things to tell them in terms of um, ways in which you can manage the return to work and not make it look like it's compulsory or it's being drilled down, but in a way that, hey, we all missed each other. So how do you think this should be packaged? Or I don't know if packaged is really the right word, but let's say dealt with, right? Because we're dealing with humans here. So how should we deal with this better?
Uh, like I said, HR has had very tough time, I would say, in bringing people on board, right? Hiring new people, especially students who've just graduated out of college, right? Now, they've never worked anywhere, and almost anybody who's studying and is looking forward to their first job looks forward to joining a company, right? That means coming on board and sort of meeting new folks around you, and then going through that incubation period or training period or whatever, right? When all of that has happened remotely on screens, it's no fun. No, let's accept that, right? And HR had to enable a lot of that, all the way from onboarding to getting people synced up with their teams and all of that. I think if there is one team that is now looking forward the most of people coming back to offices, that may be the HR team, right? Because there's a reason it's called people function, right? Because their role is about working with people, right? Bring them together and all of that. So I think HR team would be the most excited people who would really want people to be back. And I mean, at least at Zoho, we've had a very lean HR team all through these years, I would say. And even though the company has grown phenomenally, the HR team never really expanded so much, and they've had a lot on their plates. But I would say how I look at them is they've dealt it very, very nicely. They would do these, all the way from doing things online to bring people together to bring up issues like that of mental health and making counselors and people to sort of people to solve their issues while they're home. For example, if an employee is dealing with some mental health issues and they've reached out to someone, HR has taken a lot of pain in sort of sorting all these things out, including medical emergencies and whatnot. So at Zoho, HR has played a huge role in sort of working with people while they've been at home, right? And that includes not just HR, the function operations people, but also a team of doctors and consultants and all that. So now as we roll towards opening the offices, right? I mean, what HR teams typically will have to look at is like, how do we make it feel safe for people to come back? I think that's the most important question that they're looking at right now, right? How do we win that people's trust and confidence for people to come back? How do we make it safe? And that's not just installing 50 sanitizers machines in the office. That's been there for a while now, right? And these are interesting problems to solve, I would say, and some of it can be solved with technology as well. Like, can we do alternate days for certain people, alternate floors, alternate lifts, alternate bays in the office, and all of that, right? And that sort of gives some flexibility and freedom to people to see that, okay, the office is not that packed, and I can go and then some ways to sort of have lunch catered outside if it is there, right? Things like that. How do we organize the whole thing, the whole machinery around getting people to do their best, and then make them feel welcomed back in the office and not rather thrown into the office, right? You have to see it that way. How do you welcome people back, right? And with that mindset, I think that's how most HR folks are looking at it, that how do we make this environment more conducive for people to come back and be more productive? Because a lot of people have lost their productivity after the second wave, during the second wave, because a lot of us have dealt with some casualty or some illness or some challenges in the family. Okay, so I think people are also looking forward to that welcome change and at least a few days a week, like I said. But it's good when it is not a mandate. It feels better when it's not a forced thing to do. When you're welcomed and when you're invited and when you are given the flexibility that you can come in a few days a week, I think folks feel more welcomed, and they would, by the virtue of that, they would want to come more often. So if HR teams and companies take that route, that make it more welcoming, let people come in, I think that will translate into them coming in more often anyway, rather than forcing people into an office just because they finance their vaccine, which is not a big deal, honestly. Yeah.
Pretty interesting points, actually. I think the bedrock of what the next phase of return to office is going to be, it's going to be more about how to ease people back from the shockwave that we've all been through. And it's sort of been this recurring vicious cycle that we need to break and find a way to make offices, I would say, more open to a lot of things. Because while sitting at home, and I believe that, we also got time to work on side projects, to doing a bunch of things, and we sort of found a way to live with this what can I say, this open synchronous lifestyle that we've all got. But not going back, it's going to be again the same imposed routine that I think I would say first 1 week I think we'd all enjoy, and then back we'd all be back to causing traffic, swearing at everybody else. But given all of these points that we've discussed, Praval, one of the things I want to understand from you is what do you think would be the ideal playbook to sort of welcome employees back, both from a manager perspective? I mean, you manage a team, one from that perspective, and two from what a company, say like Zoho or even a startup, could probably start thinking about. What would be a better playbook for them to start at least drawing contours on, basically?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if companies and founders and the leadership team realizes that if you make it look more like an invitation than instruction, the odds are it'll work better, because we're all human beings, right? And everybody loves being invited to something rather than something being forced upon them, right? So, and it's like, how do you invite somebody home for a party, right? You do a few things. It could be, making place comfortable. At home, you try to do good food, good music, have some things to do together in common, think of it that way. But of course, for a work environment, right? And when you do that, a lot of things that people will discover once they get to the office, right? They will, all these things that they have missed and probably forgotten some of that, they'll be able to experience it and live that once again after a year and a half, right? And they would love that. I mean, you spoke about commute being a problem and the traffic and all that. And in large cities, we've all seen that happen, right? But I know a lot of people who would use their hour-long commute, again, not a great thing to do, but then if you have to do it, an hour-long commute, I know people who've used that time as their me time to read a book. And within a week, they'll finish an entire book, reading an entire book, right? Now they don't have that time because that 45, 50 minutes or an hour is now transitioned into something very, very menial, probably, right?
I mean, there's no
Or
routine set. I mean, that's
there's no
the
routine.
catch,
Yeah.
I think, because you wake up at some time. Because I mean, especially if you have the luxury to define your own work hours and if you're an IC, for example, you could probably work nights. You could become a total vampire of some sorts. But then, the earlier thing was that, hey, you could actually use these times to do something else. And I get where you're coming from with this thing. Pretty interesting stuff.
Because see, the thing is, an office gives you a structure by default without you having to give that. Without an office, I mean, okay, some people are very disciplined and they give some structure, but then there are a lot of these variables that come into play, right? I mean, when you're home and a package arrives, you have to sort of deal with that. Either you open the door or you don't, but you have to deal with it somehow, right? Somebody's at the door. What do you do, right? These things are, I mean, earlier you had some setup and you would leave the house in the morning and come back in the evening. Whatever happens between those 10 hours, you were in the office, right? You go back home and then you have a structure again for it. You have a morning routine, you have a winding down routine in the evening probably, and so on and so forth. This pandemic has sort of broken all that, right? And that's what I think has become very overwhelming for a lot of people. And that's what I'm saying. When companies use that narrative, to invite people back to office a few days a week to experience how this change feels, right? That I think will answer a lot of questions rather than defining everything from the start to the finish in advance, right? And making it very rigid again. And that itself sounds like very off-putting that I'm not sure if I want to take that and go to the office. I would rather I'd rather be where I am, right? But when you make it like an invite and you see that the other people, let's say, for example, you say that, okay, 10% of our employees will come and it's only on a first come, first serve basis where you have to fill a form, right? And I'm sure a lot of people would want to be part of that 10% on the first day, right? And that 10% would lead other people to sort of come in, and then you can do an alternate, or some people come 7 days a week and so on and so forth. That's how things will get better. And of course, let's remember, we hope that the pandemic will be behind us, if not today, eventually, right? So I would like to believe this is not going to be forever. People would want to go back to the office, but then I think people would want more flexibility in their lives because there are a lot of opportunities now available, both remotely and otherwise. And I think talent was already there. It's just that the good mapping of talent and opportunities have happened in these times. And I think good companies that understand this will value this as well, and they will make it more comfortable for people to do their best work, whether it's at an office or at home or a mix of both, is what I believe.
Sorry, but a tiny follow-up there. You were talking about people, calling their employees and inviting them back to work. And just like we kind of do up our homes when we're inviting guests, right? What do you think should people do up in the office? Do you think, of course, I'm not talking about the sanitizers and I'm not talking about the safety aspects or, even free lunch or stuff like that. But smart ways to do up the workplace. Do you think that there are things like that?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm the best guy to answer that question, and I'm great at it. But I wouldn't say. I mean, I would say don't do something that is so not you as a company, right? I mean, that's not part of your DNA, and something that's not sustainable, right? I mean, don't try to be who you're not, is what I would say, right? For example, speaking of Zoho, I don't expect our HR team to set up a rock show in the office on the first day. That's not us, right? Yeah, so try not to be too cool about it, but be genuine. Be genuine. Could be a lunch, could be just to get together, could be an open house, a live open house with the CEO, right? And where he talks about or she talks about how have they dealt with the whole pandemic in these many months, and make it fun and not about just get to your workstations, which people will eventually, of course, because that's why they're in the office. But I think a lot of it is people are missing those conversations in person, that coffee session, that lunch, sitting across the table, things like that. That's what I think we should enable. And that's what HR teams, I think, would be focusing on rather than something very fancy. I mean, cutting a cake is not going to it's not a big deal, but then it's not going to take you too far, right? So how do you bring that environment back because just let's remember, right? What have we been missing? It's the real face time. That's all that we need to. There's nothing fancy required, right? And yeah, I mean, that's what I expect HR teams to do, and all the companies that are opening up and preparing for that, I think that's where they would be headed as well.
I thought it was such a thoughtful answer. I know we almost put you on in a spot there, but I think that was really nice of you to. I really thought it was very nice. Thank you for that.
That was
Thank you
super
so much.
candid conversation for sure, and I think everyone, who's watching this also enjoyed it and sort of, took back one or two thoughts with them as well. So that brings us at the end of this quick take episode as well. Just before we quickly leave, please be sure to check out the description for Praval's LinkedIn, and if you want to connect with him and get some more insights one to one. Other than that, please do subscribe to our newsletter as well. We've got a very exciting episode coming out this week. We've got a fifth podcast episode as well. Please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and check out our Substack as well. Other than that, stay tuned for another episode with the Edge podcast for CHROs with me and Nisha. This is with our episode on welcoming employees back to work with Praval Singh here. Thanks a lot again. It's been wonderful. Thanks a lot. See you.
Thank you, Nisha and Varun. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for having me.